प्रदीप प्रभु जी अपना प्रेजेंटेशन द लॉजिक ऑफ ओरलिटी एंड द सबस्ट्रेटम ऑफ कन्वाइवलिटी पर प्रस्तुत करेंगे। श्री प्रदीप प्रभु जी।
I must first thank Professor Abhi for this opportunity. My presentation will follow really a different line of thought because I moved from activism to academics, retired as the Dean of Tata Institute, moved back into activism, and the work that we are doing on, I don't call it folklore at all. I think it's a misnomer to understand what has been narrated as folklore. My very humble submission and my very humble effort has been to understand large tribal communities as independent sui generis civilizations. They were a civilization and continue to be a civilization. That's why when I put there on this you have just a list of tribal uprisings. Against the British there have been over 200 uprisings of one civilization against an alien civilization. Just run it through. That's the first slide. Next. Okay. And this is the. So in all these uprisings, now move, you can shut this thing and go back to the. In all these uprisings, you had 2 or 3 facts which somewhere have been totally misunderstood, in fact misread and misinterpreted by modern India. And that is, most large tribal communities understood themselves to be Desh. And Desh has 3 essential elements. There is the people who feel they belong to that Desh. There is the territory which the people feel belongs to their Desh. And they have a system of administration of managing that Desh. All 3 have been part of tribal society all over the country. And that's why when from Videsh you had an enemy who came, it was the tribals who resisted. Now we have 2 arrangements that emerged. One arrangement was the totally excluded areas. So the northeast came under the arrangement of the British called the totally excluded areas, where there was no government presence except a nominal governor, but there was no British administration. The rest of central India, all right, where the British wanted to access the forest wealth of the country. By the time the British entrenched themselves in India, they had exhausted all their forests, and they looked at the forest wealth in the tribal areas. And so they came about with an arrangement called partially excluded for the purposes of the administration. So there was strictly no administration in these tribal areas, and there was an agent of the crown who had the powers to withdraw any legislation of British Parliament, to modify any legislation of British Parliament, or to draft a separate legislation in the interest of the tribal communities. And if one looks like from way back, the first uprising against the British was 1779. When one tries to look, and most of this information now is coming from the subaltern historians who are trying to get oral tradition and trying to see whether they can corroborate it and relate it. I have located more or less 200 uprisings against the British, and the uprisings still continue. All right, they still continue. And so I'm coming from that perspective. All right. And the academic in me tries to look at it in a more scientific way, not just this. So I don't call it folklore. I talk, please go previous. We have already gone 4 slides. Next slide. I'm talking of one community. I live with whom I live. I've lived for the past 40 years. These are the Warlis. All right. The Warlis populated Bombay and went up close to Surat. The airport where you land in Bombay belonged to the Warli community. Like all tribal communities, they have been systematically evicted, all right, and pushed further and further away. So you will find them scattered in parts of Thane, concentrated in Palghar, with some concentration in Dhulia, Nandurbar, and parts of Gujarat. Next. Now this is the art form of the Warlis. It is the central, part is the picture of the mother goddess. Warlis don't have temples. They don't have whatever you call idols. Okay. So Palgat is the mother goddess, who is also Dhartari. And in the center you will find this is the altar to the mother goddess, under which the young man and young woman finally are first admitted as elders and then anointed as elders, and finally they get married. Next. Now, this particular form, which was basically an art form of the women, women would draw the chauk with rice paste, was slowly adopted by tribals, young and old, to start what you call tribal art. So tribal art actually emerged from this original art form of the chauk, which belonged to the women. There is no women tribal artist, except the Suhasins, that is the acolytes, who actually still draw the chauk for every wedding. All the rest are men. And so you can say, in a way, whatever you call Warli art is actually appropriated. It's an appropriated art form. We move next. Now, what has struck me in all my this is that this society, this civilization, had a construct of how society would be. And they put it in the form of parables. And it's interesting why they put it in the form of parables. They're not folk, they're not folklore. They are very seriously constructed and developed parables, which a parable has 2 parts, you see. For the ordinary listener, it's a story. For the listener who wants to interrogate the story, there's a lot of it that is hidden. So the first parable that I'm looking at, you can shift. All right. This is the parable of the Kahankar and the Ahankar. The Kahankar is the speaker, the storyteller. All right. And the Ahankar is a person who will say, all right. And there cannot be a Kahankar without an Ahankar. He will never start telling a story without the presence of an Ahankar. So they built up this story around this Kahankar and Ahankar, who were both searching. They had not met each other for years. So they went to one corner to another village, sat by the river, told and listened to stories till they died. And the villagers then thought that their wives will come to search for them, so they did not burn the bodies, but they buried them. And the second part of the story begins with the women going searching for their husbands. And in the course of their journey, they come across this village. And the villagers tell her, yeah, there were these two people. They were sitting by the river. And they were telling stories and stories and stories and stories. And they didn't eat, they didn't drink water, and they died. But we realized that you may come, because we worship our ancestors. And so we buried them. And they said, okay, we'll exhume the bodies and give you the bones so you can do the final ancestor worship rites. Now the women took the bones and then said, but whose bones am I carrying? You know, is it my husband's bones or somebody else's bones? So they came across a ploy. No, go back to the picture, please. And at the bottom of the picture, you'll see a small kind of water body. They put the bones in the water body. And they have a reasoning that the person who was speaking, the word has energy, the word has power. And so therefore energy and power was going out of him, so his bones should be heavy. And the one who was should be light, because so much energy and power has gone out. And the listener was receiving all that energy, and so his bones must be heavy. So then the Kahankar's bones sank to the bottom. The Ahankar's bones, the Kahankar, the one who was the storyteller's bones, came up, the listener's bone went down. So now, having got the bones of this, they went back. Now behind this story, and this is important to understand why I don't call it folklore. This is man's search for meaning that is far more advanced than the society in which I have lived and grown up. Or then what does that society start with? Next slide. The logic of the story is that you cannot be yourself unless you are affirmed by another. So how is society formed? Society is formed by each of us affirming the existence and the person of the other, which is the basis of community. All right? And so therefore, it moves afterwards into what is ethics. It moves into what is truth. It moves into how do we build a society of caring and sharing. You see, it's all built in as a very scientific logic, and you reading the story as it stands will mean nothing. It's only when you interrogate the story with the storyteller, and so therefore their didactic method of teaching is this interrogation. So I interrogate myself, I interrogate the person teaching replies, and I reply, and in this process actually learning takes place. And you can see how alienating our education was. All right? Right up till the PhD level. Okay? And so they find then that there is wisdom. There is wisdom of a people as to how do we hand over knowledge to the next generation by interrogating the truth, for which we must give them all the PhDs that we have all conferred on ourselves. Okay? We move to the next slide. And so therefore, what Ahankar is saying, that the construct of society can only be by my affirming the other, and the other affirming me. All right? And this act of affirmation of each other is a very critical part of the construction of tribal society. All right? And puts a certain logic, which I will come in the last part, to the whole meaning of this. The whole conviviality is based on self-affirmation. I don't know, there are some from Tamil Nadu here. I work in Tamil Nadu. I work with government servants trying to actually do good governance, train them for good governance. And in Tamil Nadu, there's a concept called the Kudam. All right? And the Kudam is a space in a highly caste-ridden society, a space which when you enter, there is no caste distinction. There is no class distinction. There's only freedom to express yourself, and what you say in the Kudam remains in the Kudam. Right? if you go back to Ashoka, Ashoka talked of the Sangha. He talked of the Sangha as being the assembly of actually the wise, the practitioners. Now all these constructions somewhere also are part of this construction that Adivasi society has constructed all over. It's not only with the Warlis, but you will see it in the Gonds in different manners if you look at it. All right? And if they are willing to tell you, I am saying this very, very honestly. Please forgive me if I am not at all belittling, academics. The place we work is close to Bombay. All right? And so many PhD students are roaming about in our villages. And I was sitting in this village called Bandgar. Right? And so one PhD student came and asked, can I speak to the village elder? I was talking to that village elder when the student came. I said, what is my problem? You speak to the village elder, I'll move inside so you can speak openly. And what the village elder was answering his questions were exactly the opposite of what the reality was. So after the student went away, I asked that village elder, but why did you tell him all this rubbish, man? Why did you tell him what is the reality? He says, no, he wanted to hear that only. So I told him what he wanted to hear. And then I began to understand that unless you have won their confidence, you will only hear what you want to hear and they will not tell you what they want to tell you. And this is the distinction in terms of understanding of research among the Adivasi. I suppose it must be there in other communities as well. Next one. And so when you are talking of this affirmation, next slide. No, come to this picture. It's not talking, you see, you find a society that moves from hunting, food gathering to agriculture. All right? And there are all these creatures of the forest. There are the rats, there are the foxes, there are the tigers, there are the eagles, etc. All right? And they need to now, they have changed their mode of production. They have to redefine their relationship with other communities who have not changed their mode of production. And so they have this narrative about the eagle, all right? And if those who live in the countryside know that the eagle very often comes and takes a chicken from the, from outside the house courtyard or from the field. And the narrative as it builds up, I'll just go quickly through it. It's a family who have 7 sons and 7 daughters-in-law. And the 6 older sons don't have any children. And the 7th daughter-in-law gets pregnant. And as she is growing with her child, the other daughters-in-law were absolutely, terrified. And finally, when she was close to birth, they bluffed her and taking her to the forest, and they forcibly aborted her. And threw that child on a tree, on a thorny tree, and left it to die. And of course, they came back quite triumphant and threatened the woman who was forcibly aborted. Eagle picks up the child and takes it to a tree, and the eagle says, this child is crying. Yeah, my children have the nest. So he goes and gets rope and makes a cradle. It still cries. He says, of course, the child needs some milk. So he gets milk and feeds the child, etc., and brings up the child. And the child, when it's grown up a little bit, asks the eagle, are you my mother? And then the eagle says, now it's time to take you home. So the eagle takes the child back to its home. Of course, the mother recognizes the child. It's a splitting image of the mother. And there was all excitement. And then you have all the consternation among the other women. And in this consternation and all this excitement, the eagle is slipping away. And the old folk asked the eagle, no, you have brought life into our family. We were dead when no children, we were dead. We brought life back. How can we, repay this gift? And the eagle said, my commitment is to life. And then when it's flying away, it just tells the old man, there can be possibilities that when I'm very hungry and I have nothing to eat, I might take a chick from your field. So every time an eagle takes a chick from the field, it is not an eagle committing aggression against the farmer. It is the farmer repaying an old debt to nature. See, so when you have to include nature into your perspective, particularly when your dependence on nature is changing, all right, then the evolution of these parables, there's another one, you can go next, I'm not going to this, go ahead. The share of the rat, you see. And why the rat takes the paddy from the field before you can harvest? It's because we cheated him. So he takes his share before we can take our share. And then the next one, contributors to our prosperity, the pig, the dog, the cat, the rats, the frogs, and the whole of creation. So what have you done? What has the community done? It's built up an ethos of conservation of nature. So you can't see this as folklore. This is not storytelling. This is a tremendous amount of creative energy that goes into putting across very deep truths in a manner in which even the most ignorant like me can absorb. That is the difference. And so I hate the word folklore. Right? Because there's tremendous wisdom, and I suppose those who have been interrogating folklore will find and see the tremendous wisdom that comes. I only got this wisdom after living with them for 25 years. I lived in their villages for 25 years. All right? I fought with them on the streets. I went to jail, was tortured in jail, was taken to be shot. Everything has happened. All right? But then only after that did they feel I belong to them. And then they feel that now I have got the privilege of the wisdom that they have. This is what I believe. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they like some other researchers and tell them everything. It's possible. I'm not saying no. But this is what happened with this community. And so therefore, if one looks at the next slide that I'm going to, your orality has a construct within itself. All right? And orality has a construct of conviviality. You follow? Because orality is what is based on affirmation of the other as an act of affirmation by self. Non-orality, at least the kind of society that we are building, is not on affirmation of the other. Everybody is my adversary. And so therefore, governance is the management of adversarial relations in our society. Governance is the maintenance of equanimity and equity in their communities. And so when, for example, a dispute takes place between two the starting point of resolution of the dispute is admission, is not denial. And I remember once as a lawyer, I was arguing a very, very difficult case. And for somebody else. And then I finished my argument and that particular person was put in the dock. And before you start, questioning, it'll always say, Devachi Shapat, take an oath on God, you'll tell the truth. And the judge asked him, what do you have to say? And he said exactly the opposite of what the lawyer had taught him. You follow me? And the judge said, what are you doing? No. He asked me to say something, I said it. You asked me to tell the truth, I told you. It doesn't matter if that truth that I told you is going to go against me. He didn't use these words, but I'm saying in his thought. So when you look at the construct of modernity with its adversarial nature, all right, I hate appearing in court because you start by denying the truth. All right. I hate the legal system because of precisely that. It doesn't search for the truth. And I still remember a good judge told me, Pradeep, I can only give you a judgment. I can never give you justice. And so when what we have tried to do is try and collect some stories. We've got about 60 stories. We're trying to correct them, go back to them, get their understanding and their interpretation. I've printed the first set of books. It's called 10 stories. It's called Wisdom from the Wilderness. There are a few copies which are lying there, which you can, if you want, you can purchase it. It's just 150 rupees. If you want more copies, you can get in touch with Abhi. I will try and deliver it to her whenever she can, whenever I can. And the only thing I'm trying to say to you and why I'm here, because academics play an important role. All right? I have also addressed government as an academic. I drafted the forest rights as an academic and not an activist. I drafted the Self-Governance Act of the tribals as an academic and not an activist. So, therefore, government generally looks at activists who are patently, no, you cannot deal with these people, and with academics, people whom they can talk to. And I'm here to try and argue with you and hope that you will argue on behalf of those people that there's tremendous wisdom, that these societies have to be conserved, have to be protected by the assault of modernity, a modernity that will only destroy them. And I had, my last is the experience I had with the minister. I am reviewing the tribal sub-plan, which is, so we were talking about development. So I asked the minister, what do you mean by what is this development? What is this tribal sub-plan all about? He says, no, we have to help the people, the tribals, to join the mainstream. Okay? And then there was Professor Tumram, who is himself a Gond, who got very angry. Which mainstream? So then the minister got a little flummoxed. And before it could become ugly, I said, sir, can I intervene? I said, he's in the same community with whom I also belong. I said, in our community, there is no rape. So at 12 o'clock in the night, the girl can go for a dance and return at 2 o'clock in the night. And she's not afraid. And every day you read the newspapers, the Times of India newspaper in Bombay is only talking of rape, 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 and more rape. Tell me which is the mainstream. Do you want this society, which is constructed around this whole thing of affirmation and respect, to join this mainstream? He said, no. I said, then we'll have to redefine development. And I think as people who have some link with tribal societies on the ground, we have to join this issue on redefining development. And particularly I see what is happening with this new government. With the old government, we put tremendous pressure. We put tremendous pressure. You may not believe that there were more than 3 lakh people who went to jail for their rights on the forest all over the country. Okay? Now, the rights to own the forest which were theirs is being taken away. We are facing the threat of where an industrialist will walk into our villages and say, I want 100 acres for... He'll call it industry, but we'll be on the street, all right? He'll have a country home, we'll have on the street. And I think it's time that we also think, if orality is conviviality, then we need to get together and as academics stand up for, as academics stand up for those who still hold that wisdom which all other generations have somewhere lost on the way. Thank you very much.